Okay, so Joe Biden's approval ratings are just absolutely in the toilet. There's a new poll out from INI and TIPP, and it shows that Joe Biden is swirling the drain. The poll asked, who do you want to see run for president on the Democratic ticket in 2024? Joe Biden was named by 22% of those asked. 12% said Vice President Kamala Harris. None of the rest of the Democrats rose above single digits. The much-beloved Pete Buttigieg garnered 4%. AOC, Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts Representative Joe Kennedy, for some reason, and Stacey Abrams each attracted 3% support. Meanwhile, 6% of all those who answered preferred someone other than those on the list. 31% said they were unsure. And the numbers suck. Only 37% of Democrats say they are enthused about Joe Biden holding the top spot, and only 16% say they want Kamala Harris, and no one even gets more than low single-digit support after that. The numbers for Joe Biden continue to decline. There's another poll out today, and it shows voters pessimistic about the economy, Biden's leadership. This is according to a new Wall Street Journal poll. The survey, according to the Wall Street Journal, reveals a set of danger signs for the Democratic Party as it prepares to defend narrow majorities in the House and Senate. Voters by a large margin see economic and fiscal issues, including inflation, as top priorities for Washington, and they view the GOP as better able to handle them. Joe Biden's overall approval rating right now is at 41%. His disapproval is at 57%. What's much worse for Joe Biden, the strongly approve of Joe Biden number is 19%. The strongly disapprove of Joe Biden number is 46%. Woo! So you got 22% of the American public saying they somewhat approve of Joe Biden and 10% saying they somewhat disapprove. But people hate him much more than they love him, for sure. More voters apparently say they would back a Republican than a Democrat for Congress, 44% to 41% if the election were held today. That is within the poll's margin of error. But again, most of these polls tend to underestimate Republican support and Republican turnout. So these numbers are really, really bad for the Democrats right now. And as far as whether the country is on the right track or on the wrong track, according to that Wall Street Journal poll, 63% of Americans say the country is on the wrong track. Only 27% say the country is on the right track. Some 61% of Americans say the economy is headed in the wrong direction. Some 46% of Americans expect the economy to get worse next year, compared with 30% who expect it to get better. 29% margin in favor of the proposition that inflation is going to get worse rather than better. People have really bad expectations with regard to crime. By a 33-point margin, people think the crime is going to get worse, not better. 26% more Americans think that the border is going to get worse, not better. The nation's political divide, 50-point margin between people who say it's going to get worse and people who say it's going to get better. On the issues, the GOP has an advantage on the economy, inflation, and securing the border. Democrats have an advantage on getting the pandemic under control, but again, those numbers are not particularly stellar. On improving education, it's fairly evenly split. On making healthcare affordable, Democrats have an advantage, but the issues Americans care most about, rebuilding the economy and getting inflation under control, Republicans have massive advantages. So Democrats have a real problem on their hands. But the bigger issue here is that Americans just seem consumed with the idea that the future is going to suck. And I think one of the reasons that they feel consumed with the idea the future is going to suck is because we as a country seem to have lost purpose. The Surgeon General of the United States came out yesterday, and he announced that we have a mental health crisis among young Americans, which, again, if you watch TikTok for any length of time at all, you know is true. You can view my review videos over at YouTube, where I go through some of what goes on TikTok, and it is basically just a mental asylum in full public view for the walls. It's a bunch of people who are signifying their real mental disorders and doing so for people to cheer them. The Surgeon General had to put out this 53-page report today, talking about how children are in real trouble. According to the Surgeon General, he says recent national surveys of young people have shown alarming increases in the prevalence of certain mental health challenges. In 2019, 1 in 3 high school students and half of all female students reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, an overall increase of 40% from 2009. Since 2009, okay, we're not talking from 30 years ago. We're talking about just over the course of the last 12 years, an increase of 40%. According to the government, of course, this is shaped by social media. It is shaped by drug use. It's shaped by, but that doesn't go to any of the real underlying issues that are enervating the society. According to the government, quote, we know that mental health is shaped by many factors, from our genes and brain chemistry to our relationships with family and friends, neighborhood conditions, and larger social forces and policies. We also know that too often, young people are bombarded with messages through the media and popular culture that erodes their sense of self-worth, telling them they are not good-looking enough, popular enough, smart enough, or rich enough. That comes as progress on legitimate and distressing issues like climate change, income inequality, racial injustice, the opioid epidemic, and gun violence feels too slow. Of course, the U.S. Surgeon General is saying the reason that kids are now suicidal is because we haven't done enough on climate change or income inequality or racial justice. Or alternatively, there's a giant gaping hole in the soul of America's young people, and in some of its older people, that is not going to be filled by your bullcrap excuses for motivation on a daily basis. The government is also blaming technology platforms. They say when not deployed responsibly and safely, these tools can pit us against each other, reinforce negative behaviors like bullying and exclusion, and undermine the safe and supportive environments young people need and deserve. All of that was true before COVID-19 dramatically altered young people's experiences at home, at school, and in the community. The pandemic era's unfathomable number of deaths, pervasive sense of fear, economic instability, and forced physical distancing from loved ones, friends, and communities have exacerbated the unprecedented stresses young people already face. Our obligation to act is not just medical, it's moral, says Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States. Okay, so according to the Surgeon General, the reason that we're having a mental health crisis is because we're not doing all the things that the left wants you to do via the government. And that, of course, is really silly. So first they try to claim that mental health conditions that have gotten much more grave among America's young people, that is due to biological factors. Nah. In order to assume that it's due to biological factors, you would have to assume that over the last 12 years, there has been a major change in the biology of human minds, which not a lot of evidence to suggest that. Environmental factors, yes. According to Vivek Murthy, some mental health disorders seem to cluster in families. They are often shaped by multiple genes. Whether an individual develops symptoms can be further modified by experiences and surrounding environment. Environmental factors can range from exposure to alcohol or drugs during pregnancy to birth complications to discrimination and racism, to adverse childhood experiences such as abuse, neglect, exposure to community violence, and living in under-resourced or racially segregated neighborhoods. Okay, some of these are well substantiated. The notion that if you suffer from discrimination, that this leads to massive mental health crises, the suicidal ideation stats don't really back that up. In fact, it tends to be middle upper class white people who have higher levels of suicidal ideation than, for example, impoverished black people. So if it's really about class issues, then or race issues, that really doesn't explain it. They say that adverse childhood experiences can undermine a child's sense of safety, stability, bonding, and well-being. Moreover, ACEs, again, those are adverse childhood experiences, may lead to the development of toxic stress, which can cause long-lasting change. And of course, the answer to all of this is the government getting involved in everything. So they put together a graphic adopted from the WHO, talking about factors that can shape the mental health of young people. And here is what your government says. Social and economic inequalities, discrimination, racism, migration, media and technology, popular culture, and government policies all can exacerbate mental health problems. Neighborhood safety, access to green spaces like parks, healthy food, housing, healthcare, pollution, natural disasters, and climate change. This is going to affect your mental health. Climate change is going to affect your mental health. Relationship with peers, teachers, and mentors. Faith community, school climate, academic pressure, community support. Relationship with parents. Basically, everything in life can affect your mental health. But what has changed, right? This is the big question. What has changed since 2009 to 2019? According to the Surgeon General report, from 2009 to 2019, the proportion of high school students reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased by 40%. The share seriously considering attempting suicide increased by 36%. That's a huge number. The share creating a suicide plan increased by 44% between 2015 and 2011 and 2015. Youth psychiatric visits to emergency departments for depression, anxiety, and behavioral challenges increased by 28%. Between 2007 and 2018, suicide rates among youth aged 10 to 24 in the United States increased by 57%. Early estimates from the National Center for Health Statistics suggest there were more than 6,600 deaths by suicide among the 10 to 24 age group in 2020 alone. Scientists propose various hypotheses to explain all of this. They say that it might be more people discussing mental health concerns, but they also are blaming digital media, increasing academic pressure. I'm going to have to hear why increasing academic pressure is causing this, considering that our schools are underperforming and there's less academic pressure to perform in modern America than at any time in recent American history. They talk about income inequality exacerbating this sort of stuff, which is weird because we didn't have this sort of spiking depression and suicide rate during the, Great Depression. They talk about racism, gun violence, and climate change as factors. Again, it all comes back to there's a problem in society, and it must be our favored solutions that are the actual solutions. Now, if you are going to examine what is wrong with the youths, what exactly is happening with the youth, you would have to go a little bit deeper than this. Right? So they talk about some of the things that have been exacerbated during the pandemic. They say that if you've lived in an urban area or an area with more severe COVID-19 outbreaks, this has exacerbated mental health problems. If you are worried about COVID-19, if you experience disruptions in routine, which, by the way, would suggest that the lockdowns did much more damage to kids than actual COVID-19, because the number, again, of people under the age of 18 in the United States who are healthy, who've died of COVID-19 across the entirety of the pandemic is somewhere between 10 and 20, according to Marty McCary of Johns Hopkins University. So when you're talking about why young people are depressed because of COVID, it isn't because they're scared of COVID. Or if they are scared of COVID, it's because the adults are idiots. And the reason is because they've been locked in their homes and told that they cannot see other human beings. Okay, but the bigger problem here is that, again, the government's suggestions as to why we are seeing mental health problems across young people in the United States are always geared toward what can the government do to fix it. And the problem is that this is not predominantly a governmental issue. This is predominantly a philosophical issue that has now boiled down to how we raise our children, or if we even have children at all. Some of the most durable statistics in mental well-being show that, for example, religious people tend to be less suicidal. They tend to have less suicidal ideation than people who are less religious. There's good evidence to suggest that class has very little to do with it. There's good evidence to suggest that race has very little to do with it. And certainly climate change has very little to do with it. Who's got two thumbs and wants you to like and subscribe?